Can we talk about phase one?
Absolutely.
I want to understand whether there's going to be any complaints sent to the WTO about the agreement between the United States and China that was secured in the last couple of weeks.
Well,
what's your first take on that?
Well, that first take is good. I think it's good that we see some degree of détente between the two. It's about time that we see some of those tensions, at least contained and hopefully rolled back. I think this is a kind of agreement that is going to be looked into by all WTO members with very, very carefully, with magnifying lenses, checking whether everything is in accordance with the WTO disciplines and multilateral agreements. They will be watching very closely. So if there's something that is amiss, we'll know.
Well, you're the DG, so let's talk about it. Some of the content of the agreement. The optics might be encouraging that we settle some of the issues between the two biggest economies in the world. The detail, agreeing to increase trade by 200 billion and basically targeting a fixed amount of agricultural product imports out of the United States into China at a level of 40 billion. What's Brazil going to say to that? What do other suppliers of soybeans say to that?
You'll have to ask Brazil, but I would suppose that to the extent that some of those tariffs are rolled back and some of the impediments are taken away, it is natural that those imports are going to go up.
But as the Director General, I'm asking you, how do you reconcile everything the WTO stands for and a deal between the United States and China that has socialist-style central planning elements to it, between the United States and China?
Depends on how you implement that. As Director General, I'm not going to be pointing fingers, so you know that. But I suppose that, for example, if you're buying food or products under state contracts, that's okay. That's not governed by WTO rules. They have a special agreement that is valid only to the signatories. China is not part of that, but the other WTO members cannot complain with what happens in terms of government purchases. However, most favored nation tariffs apply and non-discrimination applies. So people will be looking at that very carefully now. The agreement is very general. It doesn't specify how those purchases are going to happen, what mechanisms are going to use, what kind of preference is going to be granted to U.S. Products of U.S. origin vis-a-vis the others. I suppose Brazil and the others are going to be looking very closely at all that.
But we're pretty familiar with the enforcement mechanism. If the Chinese don't reach those targets, the tariffs go back on, don't they?
Well, that's a very unusual mechanism, actually, because it's normal that in these agreements you have some kind of dispute settlement provision, something that looks at whether the two sides are complying with what has been agreed. This one, however, doesn't have any kind of arbitration or any kind of third-party oversight. It is about, directly dealing with perceived shortcomings. So if one side is not happy with what the other is doing, it will complain, they will have consultations, and at the end of the day, unilaterally, the party that is complaining, if it's not satisfied with the actions of the other side, corrective actions of the other side, it may, impose sanctions or whatever it is. It's very, it's not very usual to see something like that.
I can see that you're hesitant taking a view on it at the moment. You did mention dispute resolution, though. Let's talk about the dispute resolution mechanism at the WTO. For our audience right now who maybe haven't been following this very carefully, walk us through what's happened and what's happening with the dispute resolution mechanism at the WTO.
Well, the two things are separate. I think what's happening between the U.S. and China, is U.S. and China bilateral agreement. That doesn't affect the WTO dispute settlement mechanism at all. What is happening now is that clearly the U.S. That has been complaining for quite some time. So this is not a Trump administration complaint. This has been there before about the appellate body and the way that the appellate body has been conducting itself. Whether you agree or not with those complaints, that's a different conversation. But they have been complaining for quite some time. In this administration, they said, enough is enough. We need to change this. And I think that's where we are now. We are now sitting in Geneva with others and say, okay, so we need to change the system. How? Is it doable? Do the changes that the U.S. want to see, would the others live with it? or not. I mean, this is where we are at this point in time. We cannot take too long, though.
Well, can we talk about some of the issues? They think that some of the people on that dispute resolution body at the WTO are paid too much.
They're what?
They are paid too much. They earn too much money. They're incentivized to drag on some of the disputes because they can earn more money. That's one of the issues out there. You're aware of it.
It's an important issue, but I think it's a small issue.
Do you think they're paid too much?
I think it was agreed by members. I mean, I didn't decide that.
Sure, but this is part of the United States pushback at the moment, isn't it?
The United States agreed to that. The United States agreed to that. The EU and all the other members, 164 of them, decided these are the terms of the payments. But over time, inefficiencies were introduced. I mean, those disputes were supposed to be taken care of in 90 days. Now, the appellate body has been taking 6 months, sometimes more, to finalize its appreciation.
My understanding is that those on the appellate body at the moment...
But I don't think they're doing that because of the money. I think they're doing that because...
But let's talk about the money. The money's a feature of this. The administration, the US administration under President Donald Trump, as you know, have been very unhappy about the way some of these bodies have been run. And as I understand it, you can earn north of 300,000 Swiss francs sitting on the appellate body. You can, can't you? Now, for the US administration, they're looking at that situation right now and saying, that's too much. We need a more efficient mechanism, and we need to incentivize it to be more efficient as well. What's your thoughts? As the Director General on that particular issue, what are your thoughts?
If that were the only issue, we could do it like that. That's easy. Not a problem. That is not a problem.
What do you think the bigger issue is?
The bigger issue is how to make it run faster, how to make it more efficient, how to make it responsive to those disputes in a way that they're not setting precedents, or they're not, according to the U.S., for example, they do not behave as a court. Yeah. Where you have 5 or 7 guys there who believe that they are international judges. They're above, they're above right or wrong. Whatever they decide, it's the divine rule or something. That's the way the U.S. sees it. So I think we have to change that kind of perception. That's for me is the trickiest part.
Let's wrap things up by getting to one of the disputes. The United States getting together with the European Union, the Japanese, to complain to you guys that China is subsidizing its industries unfairly. Can you deal with these kind of issues?
Absolutely.
How?
Easy. Make the rules. One of the problems we have is that the U.S. and, well, Japan and the EU claim, and rightly so, by the way, that the rules are not perfect. That, for example, the export subsidies or prohibited subsidies rules, they don't capture many of the things that are happening out there. And therefore, we need to update the rules to begin to be more, responsive to today's reality. Now, the problem with that is that why do we not have that? We do not have those rules as perfect as they wish they were, because in the past, before China even got into the scene, the big powers, the U.S., the EU, well, Japan, Canada, Australia, and the others, they could not agree amongst themselves on those rules. So they said, you know what, put that aside for the moment. Let's go on and do other stuff. China came in, the WTO, 2001, and since then, they have been doing things that others are saying, well, that's not what we were expecting. Therefore, we need to... I think if members are unhappy with that, they have to talk about it. And I don't think that China is against having this conversation. I think they already told me directly that they are fine with negotiations. If the people want to change the rules, let's change the rules. But let's sit down and have a conversation about that.
As your experience has been, as many people's experience has been over the last 20 years, the Chinese often talk about getting around the table to do things. We don't get the follow-up. Are you really confident that the Chinese would agree to the pressure that the US, EU and China is putting on them right now to pull back from subsidizing their industries, when they've been pretty clear over the last few years that they've got a plan? Dominate certain industries by 2025, doesn't matter to the expense of anyone else, and we're going to subsidize those industries until it happens. Why would they sign up to any rules at the WTO when we know that's their mission?
Because things change, and I think that the degree of rejection that you see today in the international community for, against certain practices that are happening in China, whether they are true accusations or not, that's a different conversation. Yeah. Those are real. And I don't think China can close their eyes on this. And they realize that it's better to have a negotiated solution and deal than to be subject to unilateral tariffs the way that they have been in the recent past.